They thought nothing could intimidate them. Until the human made eye contact, became reality, when Frank Wilson faced Peloro champion Graffalar in the Mind Battle Finals. Despite Blind Code's neural manipulation, Frank maintained his unwavering gaze for 57 seconds, shattering Gra's composure with 6 powerful words. "I see you. I see your fear." In that moment, centuries of Peloro dominance crumbled before human determination. The holographic display above Nexus Central pulsated with blue energy, casting eerie shadows across the floating platforms of Arcturus 7. Frank Wilson, stared up at the massive advertisement for the upcoming Mind Battle Championship, his blue eyes narrowing as the words scrolled across the screen. "Only those who master mindsight can triumph. No human has ever advanced beyond the preliminaries." Frank adjusted his travel bag on his broad shoulder, his 6'5" frame and 308-pound muscular build drawing curious glances from passing Arcturians. Their slender, blue-tinted bodies seemed almost fragile compared to his solid mass. He'd been on Arcturus 7 for less than a day, and already he felt the weight of their judgment. "Another human tourist?" a passing Savar muttered, their skin shifting from green to a dismissive gray as they walked by. The Savar were known for their biological camouflage abilities and their mastery of mindsight, the art of reading and manipulating an opponent's psychological state through eye contact alone. Frank ignored the comment, focusing instead on making his way to the registration center for the Mind Battle Tournament. The Third Planetary Alliance had formed over 50 years ago, uniting the Arcturians, Savars, and Peloros in what they called an equal partnership. But humans remained outsiders, tolerated for trade, but rarely respected. That was about to change, or at least, Frank hoped it would. The registration center was a sprawling crystal dome, hovering 30 feet above the central plaza. Frank took the gravity elevator, feeling his stomach lurch as it propelled him upward. Inside, the dome buzzed with activity. Contestants from dozens of planets filing paperwork, checking schedules, and sizing up competition. Name and planet of origin? The Arcturian behind the counter barely looked up as Frank approached. "Franklin Wilson, Earth." That got the clerk's attention. Bright, pupilless eyes fixed on Frank's face. "Human? For the Mind Battle registration?" The clerk's tone held unmistakable amusement. "This isn't a physical combat tournament. Mind Battle requires mind sight. Which humans?" The clerk made a gesture that seemed universally dismissive across species. "I have this." Frank produced a small holographic card, a special invitation that had arrived at his Houston apartment 3 weeks ago. The card glowed with authentic certification markers. The clerk's expression shifted from amusement to confusion. "This is an executive exemption. How did you—" "Blood donation. Apparently my HDC blood type is useful for some Arcturian medical research." Frank didn't mention that the doctor who'd taken his blood had whispered that he was one of 10 who might stand a chance against mindsight. The clerk processed his registration with reluctant efficiency. "You're assigned to waiting room 17B. Preliminaries begin tomorrow. Don't expect to advance." The words carried the casual cruelty of someone absolutely certain of another's failure. Frank pocketed his contestant badge and turned to leave when a commotion near the entrance caught his attention. A group of Savars entered, led by a tall, muscular figure, whose skin rippled with patterns of deep crimson and gold, colors of status among their kind. "Zar 7, someone whispered nearby. "3-time regional champion." Behind the Savars came a group of gray-skinned Peloros, moving with unsettling silence. Their leader, smaller than the others, but with an intensity that seemed to bend the light around him, walked with absolute confidence. The Peloros were known as the Emotionless Ones, masters of psychological warfare who claimed to feel no fear, no hesitation in the face of danger. As Frank made his way toward the exit, the crowd parted to allow the champions through. Suddenly, he found himself directly in the path of Tsar Savin. The Savar stopped, his skin shifting to a pattern of aggressive red spirals. Human. Tsar's voice carried just enough volume for those nearby to hear. They'll let anything compete these days. Frank said nothing, but he didn't lower his gaze either. Something he'd learned in his sumo days. Never show weakness before the match begins. The Peloro leader, Pelogris, according to the whispers around them, stepped forward, his gray face expressionless, but his eyes scanning Frank with clinical precision. I heard humans rely solely on physical strength, Pelo said, voice devoid of inflection. Here, you'll taste the flavor of defeat within seconds. Frank remained silent, his eyes steady. He'd been dismissed his entire life, too aggressive for professional sumo, too unrefined for corporate jobs, too human for this advanced society. But somewhere within him, a thought crystallized. I might not have mind sight, but my eyes can make them tremble. The moment stretched, tense and electric, until Tsar Savin suddenly blinked, a barely perceptible flutter of eyelids, and stepped aside. A ripple of surprised murmurs spread through the onlookers. Frank walked past, conscious of hundreds of alien eyes following his movement. The first battle, microscopic as it was, had been fought, and somehow, he hadn't lost. As he exited the dome, an announcement echoed across Nexus Central. The 151st Mind Battle Tournament begins tomorrow. 400 contestants from 53 planets. Only one will master the ultimate Mindsight challenge. Frank looked up at the holographic displays showing past champions, all Savars and Peloros, with the occasional Arcturian. No human face had ever appeared there. Time to change that, he muttered to himself. The preliminary rounds of the Mind Battle were held in the Mind Arena, a massive floating structure resembling an inverted cone, hovering above the central district of Nexus Central. 5,000 spectators filled the surrounding stands, their excited chatter creating a constant background hum. Frank stood in the preparation chamber with 9 other contestants from his qualifying group. They'd been divided into 40 groups of 10, with only the top performer from each group advancing to the next round. The rules had been explained that morning. Each contestant would face 2 challenges, the Stare Challenge and the Mind Maze. In the first, contestants would be paired up to maintain eye contact without blinking. Those who broke contact first would lose points. In the second, they would enter a neural simulation where their deepest fears would be projected. Those who maintained composure would advance. Group 7, prepare for Stare Challenge. The announcement came through the chamber speakers. Frank rolled his shoulders, trying to loosen the tension in his neck. He'd barely slept, the alien environment of Arcturus 7 making rest difficult. Around him, the other contestants, 2 Savars, 3 Peloros, and 4 Arcturians, performed their own preparation rituals. The door slid open, and they were led into the arena proper. The floating platform glowed with soft blue light, surrounded by hovering cameras that transmitted every moment to the audience and to viewers across the Alliance. Contestant pairings will appear on your neural displays, the announcer's voice boomed. Frank, lacking the neural implants common to Alliance citizens, looked to the large holographic display overhead. His name appeared alongside Tsar Savin. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Being paired with a champion in the preliminary round was either terrible luck or a deliberate attempt to eliminate the human early. Tsar Savin stepped onto the marked circle opposite Frank. His skin, now a confident pattern of gold and black. His eyes, larger than human eyes and with vertical pupils, fixed on Frank with predatory focus. Stare Challenge begins in 3, 2, 1. Commence. A timer appeared overhead, counting the seconds. The rules were simple. Maintain eye contact. Don't blink. Don't look away. The neural monitors would detect any deviation. Frank locked eyes with Tsar, consciously controlling his breathing as he'd been taught in sumo training. 30 seconds seemed both impossibly long and surprisingly brief. Czar's eyes bore into him with practiced intensity. Frank could almost feel the pressure, a physical sensation like fingers pressing against his temples. This was mind sight in action, the ability to project psychological pressure through focused eye contact. 5 seconds passed, then 10. Frank's eyes began to burn, but he maintained his gaze. He thought of all the times he'd been told he wasn't good enough, wasn't disciplined enough, wasn't right for professional sumo despite his potential. 15 seconds. Czar's confidence began to waver, almost imperceptibly. A flicker of surprise crossed his features. Humans weren't supposed to withstand mindsight pressure this long. 20 seconds. The crowd had fallen silent, watching the unexpected battle of wills. Frank felt sweat beading on his forehead, but he didn't dare wipe it away. Remember your training, Frank told himself. Control your breathing. Focus on a point just beyond your opponent. 25 seconds. Something changed in Czar's expression, a tightening around the eyes, a tension in the jaw. His skin patterns shifted slightly, rippling with uncertainty. And then, at 12 seconds remaining, Czar 7 blinked. The arena erupted. A human, had outlasted the 3-time regional champion in a stare challenge. The neural monitors confirmed it. No technical errors, no disqualifications, a clean victory. Czar's skin flushed a deep, embarrassed purple as he stepped back. His voice a hiss. Beginner's luck. Frank said nothing, just nodded respectfully and moved to the waiting area for the second challenge. His heart hammered in his chest. One victory, but the harder test was yet to come. The Mind Maze Challenge took place in isolation chambers around the arena's perimeter. Each contestant would be connected to a neural interface that would construct a personalized psychological labyrinth based on their own subconscious fears and traumas. Frank was led to Chamber 7. Inside was a reclined chair with neural connection points designed for alliance species. This may not properly calibrate for human physiology, the technician warned, adjusting the settings. Your experience may be intense. I'll manage, Frank replied, sitting down. The neural connectors were placed on his temples. A moment of discomfort, then Frank gasped as reality dissolved around him. He was no longer in the chamber, but standing in a dimly lit Tokyo alleyway. Rain fell in sheets, soaking through his clothing. In the distance, he could hear the sounds of a sumo stable, the grunts of wrestlers, the sharp commands of coaches. This was his memory, the day he'd been asked to leave the Kitajima stable after his third physical confrontation with another wrestler. Too aggressive, they'd said. No discipline, no control. Frank took a tentative step forward, and the scene shifted. Now he stood in a Houston bar, watching himself drink alone after losing yet another underground fighting match. The loneliness, the sense of wasted potential, it all crashed over him in waves. This is just a simulation, he reminded himself. These are memories, not reality. The bar began to shimmer and distort. Blood began seeping from the walls. The patrons turned to face him, their eyes hollow black pits. His deepest fear, that he would always be alone, always be rejected, always be the outsider. Frank's heart raced, but he forced himself to breathe evenly. I faced this in Japan, he whispered. I faced this in Houston. It's just fear. It has no power over me. The scene shifted again. A hospital room where his mother lay dying, her hand cold in his. The moment he'd felt most helpless, most powerless. Mom, he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. Her image distorted, her face elongating into something inhuman. You failed, the thing wearing his mother's face hissed. You'll always fail. Frank closed his eyes. This isn't real. This is a test. He remembered what his sumo coach had told him, before asking him to leave. Your strength isn't the problem, Franklin. It's that you fight against yourself more than your opponent. The revelation hit him like a thunderbolt. The mind maze wasn't about escaping the labyrinth. It was about facing what was within it, about accepting the fear rather than fighting it. Frank opened his eyes and stepped toward the monstrous version of his mother. "I see you," he said calmly. "I acknowledge you. But you don't control me." The monster shrieked, and then dissolved. The hospital room faded, replaced by a glowing doorway. When Frank stepped through, he found himself back in the isolation chamber, the neural connectors retracting from his temples. The technician stared at him in disbelief. 3 minutes, 12 seconds, the technician said. That's the fastest completion time in today's preliminaries. Frank sat up, his head spinning slightly. "Did I pass?" The technician nodded slowly. "You did more than pass. You excelled." Outside the chamber, a small crowd had gathered. Officials, other contestants, and a slender Arcturian woman holding recording equipment. "Franklin Wilson," she approached, her voice carrying the melodic accent of educated Arcturians. "I'm Daria Thorne from the Arcturian Communications Collective. Would you be willing to share your experience in the mind maze?" Before Frank could answer, an announcement echoed through the arena. "Preliminary results are confirmed. Advancing contestants, please report to the central platform for recognition." Frank was ushered to the platform along with 39 other survivors of the preliminary round. Standing there under the intense lights, he realized he was the only human among them. The crowd's reaction was mixed, some cheering the novelty, others murmuring in disapproval. "Qualifier Wilson," an official approached him after the ceremony. "You have been assigned to Master Tanaka's preparation group for the next round. Please report to Training Facility 3 tomorrow morning." "Master Tanaka?" Frank asked. "A mind sight specialist who works with unconventional contestants." The official's tone made it clear what category Frank fell into. That night, in his assigned quarters, Frank researched Master Tanaka. The man was a legend in certain circles, a human of Japanese descent who had lived on Arcturus 7 for 30 years, studying mind sight techniques without being a Savar or Peloro. He'd never competed himself but had trained several notable Arcturian champions. As Frank drifted toward sleep, his neural tablet pinged with a message from an unknown sender. "They're afraid of you now, not because you're strong, but because you saw through their greatest weapon. Be careful. Not everyone wants a human to succeed. A friend." Frank stared at the message for a long time before finally closing his eyes, wondering who in this alien world might consider themselves his friend. Training Facility 3 was located beneath Nexus Central, accessible only by a private gravity tube that descended deep into the planet's crust. Frank arrived early, finding himself in what appeared to be a traditional Japanese dojo, complete with wooden floors and rice paper screens. In the center sat an elderly Japanese man in simple gray clothing, his eyes closed in meditation. Despite the man's apparent age, Frank guessed at least 80. There was an unmistakable vitality about him. "Franklin Wilson," the man spoke without opening his eyes. "The human who stared down Zar 7 and conquered the mind maze in record time. Quite the achievement for someone with no formal mind sight training." Frank remained at the entrance, uncertain of protocol. "Master Tanaka?" The old man opened his eyes, sharp, alert eyes that seemed to see through Frank rather than at him. "Come, sit." He gestured to a cushion opposite him. Frank removed his shoes and sat cross-legged on the cushion, his large frame making the position somewhat uncomfortable. "You were a sumo wrestler," Tanaka observed, "but you left that path. Why?" Frank shifted uncomfortably. "They said I was too aggressive, too emotional." Tanaka nodded. "And yet in the mind maze, you showed remarkable emotional control. Interesting contradiction, yes?" Before Frank could respond, the dojo's entrance slid open again, and 9 other contestants entered, a mix of Savars, Peloros, and Arcturians who had advanced from the preliminaries. Among them, Frank recognized Plex, a renowned Savar champion. Following the contestants was Daria Thorne, the reporter from the previous day. Ms. Thorne has permission to observe our training for her documentary, Tanaka explained, noting Frank's questioning look. The Mind Battle Committee encourages media coverage. The training began immediately. Tanaka explained that true mind sight went beyond intimidation. It was about reading subtle neurological signals, eye movement, micro-expressions, breathing patterns, muscle tension. Humans lack the biological adaptations of Savars and Peloros, Tanaka acknowledged. But human eyes have their own power. You must learn to see in two dimensions simultaneously, outward at your opponent and inward at yourself. The exercises were unlike anything Frank had experienced. They practiced bidirectional focus, maintaining awareness of an opponent's signals while simultaneously monitoring their own emotional state. They practiced controlled breathing techniques that minimized involuntary eye movements. They learned to recognize the most subtle tells of psychological pressure. Throughout the training, Daria recorded and occasionally asked questions. Her focus seemed particularly fixed on Frank, the human anomaly in the competition. During a break, she approached him. "You're becoming quite the sensation, Mr. Wilson. The feeds are calling you the human who stares back." Frank sipped water from a hydration pod. "I'm just trying to survive the next round." "Why enter the mind battle at all?" she asked. "Most humans avoid these competitions entirely." Frank considered the question. The 5 million energy credits prize would solve his financial problems. But that wasn't the whole truth. "All my life, I've been told what I can't do," he finally said. "Can't be a sumo champion because I'm too aggressive. Can't fit into corporate Earth because I'm too physical. Can't possibly compete in mind battle because I'm human. I'm tired of being told what I can't do." Daria studied him with intelligent eyes. "And if you win, what then?" Frank hadn't thought that far ahead. "Then maybe people will stop underestimating humans." That evening, after the other trainees had left, Master Tanaka invited Frank to stay for additional instruction. "You have a natural ability," the old man said, pouring tea into 2 small cups. "But natural ability is not enough against what you will face. The emotion matrix." Frank nodded. He'd been briefed on the next challenge, a more intense version of the mind maze where contestants would face not just their own fears, but artificially induced emotional states designed to break their concentration. More than that, Tanaka's voice dropped lower. There are elements in this competition that do not wish to see a human advance, particularly a human who has shown unexpected aptitude. Frank set down his teacup. "What do you mean?" Tanaka glanced toward the corners of the room, then tapped a small device on his wrist. A subtle humming filled the air. "Privacy field," he explained. "Ms. Thorne is not the only one recording in this facility. You think I'm being monitored? I know you are. Just as I know that your pairing with Tsar Savin was no coincidence. They expected you to fail immediately and embarrassingly. Your success has complicated matters." Frank leaned forward. "Who's they?" "The Peloro Consortium controls much of the mind battle infrastructure. They have maintained their dominance for decades, partly through talent, partly through other means." "Cheating?" Frank raised an eyebrow. "Let us say advantage creation," Tanaka replied carefully. "The Arcturians provide the technology. The Peloros provide the methodology. The result is a system that perpetuates their supremacy. And a human champion would disrupt that." "Precisely." Tanaka refilled their cups. "Tomorrow you face Plex in the Eye War, and then the Emotion Matrix. Both will test you beyond anything you've experienced. But remember, your greatest weapon is not aggression, but certainty. Certainty in yourself." Frank left the training facility with his mind churning. If what Tanaka suggested was true, he wasn't just fighting for himself, but against an entire system designed to ensure his failure. That night, he couldn't sleep. He paced his quarters, reviewing Tanaka's techniques, preparing mentally for the challenges ahead. Around midnight, his neural tablet pinged again. Your blood type wasn't selected by accident. They've been studying HDC blood for its resistance to certain neural manipulations. Be careful in the emotion matrix. Not all the emotions you'll feel will be your own. A friend. Frank stared at the message, a chill running through him. Who was sending these warnings? And what did his blood have to do with neural manipulation? The answers would have to wait. Tomorrow, he faced Orenplex and the next phase of the mind battle. The quarterfinal rounds began the next morning. 20 contestants remained, divided into 4 groups of 5. From each group, only 2 would advance to the semifinals. The Mind Arena had been reconfigured for the iWar challenge. 2 circular platforms hovered 10 feet apart, surrounded by neural monitors and projection equipment. Contestants would stand facing each other, attempting to break their opponent's concentration through focused eye contact alone. No physical movement was permitted, except breathing. Frank's match against Orenplex was scheduled third. He watched the first 2 contests carefully, noting how quickly the losers' neural readings destabilized once their opponent gained psychological momentum. Contestant Wilson and Champion Plex, please take your positions. The announcement came. Frank stepped onto the left platform. Across from him, Orenplex, taller than most Savars, with skin that shimmered in complex patterns of green and gold, took his position. Oren was famous for his mind shield technique, a defensive approach to mind sight that had made him nearly unbeatable in previous tournaments. I studied your match against Czar, Oren said quietly, as the systems calibrated around them. Impressive, for a human. But Czar was overconfident. I won't make the same mistake. Frank said nothing, focusing on his breathing, centering himself as Tanaka had taught him. iWar commences in 3, 2, 1. Begin. The neural monitors activated, creating a visible aura around each contestant. Frank's a steady blue. Oren's a confident green. Their eyes locked. Immediately, Frank felt the pressure, more subtle than Czar's aggressive approach, but somehow more pervasive. Oren's technique wasn't about intimidation, but erosion, a slow, steady wearing down of resistance. Frank recalled Tanaka's words, certainty in yourself. He focused not just on Oren's eyes, but on his own internal state, maintaining awareness of his breathing, his heartbeat, the tension in his facial muscles. 15 seconds passed, then 20. Oren's green aura began to pulse slightly, a sign of increased effort. His eyes narrowed, the pressure intensifying. Frank felt sweat beading on his forehead but remained still. In his mind, he visualized a white light surrounding him, deflecting the psychological pressure Oren was projecting. 25 seconds. Something changed in Oren's expression, a flicker of uncertainty. The Savar champion had never needed to maintain his mind shield this long against a human opponent. Frank's focus narrowed to a single point, Oren's pupils, which had begun to dilate with stress. The slight tension in the Savar's temples indicated increasing effort. At 27 seconds, Orenplex blinked. The neural monitors flashed, confirming Frank's victory. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, others in disbelief. Oren stepped back, his skin flushing with patterns of dark surprise. How? He asked simply. Frank, still maintaining his composure, replied quietly, by accepting the pressure rather than fighting it. He stepped off the platform, aware of the whispers spreading through the arena. 2 victories over champion Savars could no longer be dismissed as luck. The human contestant had become a legitimate threat. But the harder challenge still awaited, the emotion matrix. The emotion matrix chambers were sealed pods suspended from the arena ceiling, each containing neural induction equipment far more sophisticated than the mind maze technology. contestants would face artificially generated emotional states, calibrated to their specific psychological profiles. The objective is simple. The chief technician explained to the remaining contestants. Maintain emotional equilibrium regardless of the induced states. Those whose neural patterns show the least deviation will advance. Frank entered his assigned pod with trepidation. The interior was stark white, with a single reclined chair surrounded by neural induction nodes. As he settled into the chair, restraints automatically secured his arms and legs. Safety precaution, the technician's voice came through a speaker. Some contestants have physical reactions to the emotional inductions. The nodes descended, connecting to Frank's temples, wrists, and chest. A brief flash of discomfort, then. Frank was 10 years old again, standing in the middle of a sumo ring in Tokyo, his first junior tournament. He had been so proud, so excited. But something was wrong. The crowd was silent, staring at him with disappointment. His coach shook his head sadly. "Not good enough," the memory coach said. "Never good enough." Frank felt the crushing weight of inadequacy, but distantly recognized it as an artificial induction. "This isn't real," he reminded himself. "This is a manufactured emotion." The scene shifted. He was in his Houston apartment, reading the rejection letter from the Earth Corporate Alliance. "Your physical capabilities are impressive, Mr. Wilson, but your psychological profile indicates poor integration potential." The feeling of rejection intensified, amplified beyond what he'd actually felt. Frank's heart raced, but he focused on his breathing, on the techniques Tanaka had taught him. "Accept the emotion," he whispered to himself. "Don't fight it. Observe it." The scene shifted again, more rapidly now. His mother's funeral, a failed relationship. The day he left the sumo stable in disgrace. Each memory carried an emotional payload, each artificially enhanced to maximum impact. 4 minutes into the test, Frank felt his control slipping. The emotions were coming too fast, too intensely. Sweat poured down his face as he struggled to maintain equilibrium. Then he remembered Tanaka's words. "Your memory is the thread connecting you to your true self. Acknowledge it. Don't deny it." Frank stopped trying to resist the emotional onslaught. Instead, he acknowledged each feeling as it came. The inadequacy, the rejection, the grief, the shame. "I see you," he said to each emotion. "I accept that you exist, but you don't define me." Something shifted. The emotional storm continued, but Frank found himself at its center, in a space of unexpected calm. He could observe the feelings without being consumed by them. When the test ended 4 minutes later, Frank emerged from the pod exhausted but steady. The technicians stared at the neural readings in disbelief. 8 minutes of sustained emotional induction, one whispered, and his pattern deviation never exceeded 17%. That's unprecedented for a non-Peloro. The results were announced an hour later. Frank had not only survived the emotion matrix, he had achieved the second highest stability rating in the entire competition. Only Graf Falar, the Peloro champion, had scored higher. He had advanced to the semifinals. That evening, as Frank rested in his quarters, trying to process the day's events, his door chimed. When he opened it, Daria Thorne stood in the corridor, her expression troubled. "May I come in?" she asked. "This isn't for my documentary." Frank hesitated, then stepped aside. Daria entered quickly, activating a privacy field generator similar to Tanaka's. "First, congratulations on advancing," she said. "But that's not why I'm here." "I figured," Frank replied. "What's going on?" Daria produced a small data crystal. "I've been investigating the mind battle infrastructure for my documentary. Standard background research. But I found something concerning." She inserted the crystal into a projection node, and a complex schematic appeared in the air between them. "This is the operational architecture for the emotion matrix," she explained. But there's a subsystem that doesn't appear in any official documentation. She highlighted a section labeled Blind Code. What is it? Frank asked. From what I can decipher, it's an override protocol that allows for targeted neural manipulation beyond the standard emotional inductions. In simple terms, it can induce hallucinations, disorientation, even temporary paralysis in specific contestants. Frank's blood ran cold. Cheating. Sophisticated cheating, Daria corrected. Nearly undetectable unless you know exactly what to look for. And it appears to be controlled exclusively by Peloro administrators. Have you taken this to the Mind Battle Committee? Daria's expression darkened. The committee is heavily influenced by the Peloro Consortium, and my news organization has financial relationships with them. If I present this officially, it will be buried, and my career with it. So why tell me? Because you're an anomaly. Mr. Wilson, a human who's succeeding where you shouldn't be able to. And according to these logs, they tried to use blind code on you during the emotion matrix today, but it failed. The message about his blood type suddenly made sense. HDC blood, Frank murmured. Exactly, Daria nodded. Human HDC blood contains a unique protein structure that creates natural resistance to certain neural manipulations. That's why you were invited. Not because they wanted you to succeed, but because they wanted to study how your resistance worked so they could overcome it. Frank paced the small room, processing this information. So what happens now? I'm in the semifinals against Pelogris. If what you're saying is true, they'll use everything they have to stop me. That's why I'm here, Daria said. Master Tanaka sent me. He says you need to prepare differently for tomorrow. How? By learning to hack the system from within. For the next 2 hours, Daria and Frank reviewed the blind code architecture. The system worked by identifying neural pathways associated with fear and amplifying them exponentially during critical moments of competition. Most contestants never realized what was happening. They simply experienced a sudden, overwhelming terror that broke their concentration. The key is to recognize the artificial spike, Daria explained. The onset is too sudden to be natural. If you can identify it, you can mentally counter it. And if I can't? Daria's expression was grim. Then you'll experience your worst fears multiplied 100-fold, and you'll lose, spectacularly and humiliatingly. After Daria left, Frank sat in darkness, contemplating what he'd learned. The competition was rigged, had been for years, possibly decades. The Peloro dominance wasn't just skill, it was systematic manipulation. His neural tablet pinged with another anonymous message. Tomorrow, they will throw everything at you. Remember, the fear isn't yours. It's theirs. A friend. Frank stared at the message for a long time before replying. Who are you? The response came immediately. Someone who believes humanity deserves its place in the Alliance. Win tomorrow. Franklin Wilson. Show them what a human's eyes can do. The semi-final match between Frank and Pelogris drew the largest audience yet. The Peloro champion had demolished 19 previous opponents, none lasting more than 15 seconds in direct eye-war confrontation. As Frank entered the arena, the crowd's energy was electric, anticipation mixed with skepticism. Could the human anomaly possibly stand against the Peloro master? Pelogris already stood on his platform, smaller than most Peloros at only 5 feet tall, but with an intensity that seemed to distort the air around him. His gray skin was nearly featureless, his red eyes unblinking as they tracked Frank's approach. I've studied you, human, Palo said as Frank took his position. Your victories are impressive but ultimately meaningless. No one has ever withstood the phantom gaze. Frank said nothing, focusing on centering himself, on the techniques Tanaka and Daria had taught him. He knew now what he was really fighting against, not just Pelogris, but the blind code system that would attempt to shatter his composure. Semi-final eye war commences in 3, 2, 1. Begin. Their eyes locked. And immediately, Frank felt the difference. Zarsavin had been aggressive. Orenplex had been methodical. But Pellegrini was emptiness. His gaze contained no emotion whatsoever. A void that seemed to pull at Frank's consciousness, inviting him to fall into its depths. This was the famous phantom gaze technique, the ability to project absolute emotional nullity, creating a psychological vacuum that most opponents rush to fill with their own fears. Frank maintained his focus, imagining his gaze as a beam of light cutting through darkness. He was human. He had value. His eyes carried the determination of his entire species. 15 seconds passed. Pelo's expression remained unchanged, but a subtle tension appeared in his posture. 20 seconds. Frank felt the first artificial spike, a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread that wasn't his own. The blind code activation. He recognized it for what it was, and mentally labeled it, "Not mine." 25 seconds. Pelo's emotionless mask cracked slightly, a barely perceptible narrowing of the eyes, a tightening of the jaw. The Peloro champion had never needed to maintain the phantom gaze this long. 30 seconds. The artificial fear intensified, accompanied by flashing images of failure and humiliation projected directly into Frank's mind. But he had been prepared. Each foreign emotion, each implanted image, he acknowledged and set aside. Not mine. At 35 seconds, something extraordinary happened. Pellegrini blinked. Then again. The neural monitors registered a spike in his stress patterns. "Impossible," the Peloro whispered, his voice barely audible. Frank maintained his gaze, unwavering. In his mind, he visualized ice melting under intense heat, his determination breaking through the phantom gaze. At 42 seconds, Pellegrini stepped back, breaking eye contact. The neural monitors flashed confirmation of Frank's victory. The arena erupted in chaos. A human had defeated the reigning Peloro champion in direct psychological combat. It was unprecedented, unthinkable. As Frank stepped off the platform, exhausted but triumphant, he caught sight of Daria in the press section. Her expression, a mixture of amazement and concern. She made a subtle gesture toward the upper control booth, where several Peloro officials were engaged in intense conversation. They wouldn't take this defeat lightly. The final round, against Graffalar, the undefeated Peloro master, would be even more dangerous. But for now, Frank had accomplished what no human had before. He had advanced to the Mind Battle Finals. The night before the final round, Frank met secretly with Master Tanaka and Daria in a secure location beneath Nexus Central. The old master had aged visibly in just the past few days, the strain of their covert operation evident in his lined face. "Graffalar is unlike any opponent you've faced," Tanaka warned. "Three-time champion, undefeated in 67 consecutive matches. His technique combines the phantom gaze with what the Peloros call mind blink, a rapid neural induction that bypasses conscious defenses. And the blind code will be set to maximum," Daria added, reviewing data on her tablet. "My sources say they've modified the system specifically to overcome HDC blood resistance." Frank absorbed this information grimly. "So, what's our counter-strategy?" Tanaka produced a small neural chip. "This is a blind code detector. It won't block the effects, but it will alert you when they're being applied, allowing you to distinguish between Phalar's natural techniques and artificial manipulation." "Is that legal?" Frank asked. Daria's laugh was bitter. "We're fighting a rigged system, Mr. Wilson. Legality is a luxury we can't afford." The chip was implanted at the base of Frank's skull, a minor procedure that left only a small red mark easily covered by his collar. They spent the remainder of the night reviewing Graffalar's previous matches, identifying patterns in his technique, and practicing mental defenses. As dawn broke over Arcturus 7, Frank felt a strange calm descend over him. He had come to this planet as an outsider, seeking validation. Now he stood as a challenger to an entire corrupt system. "Win or lose today," Tanaka said as they prepared to part ways. "You have already accomplished something remarkable. You have shown that humanity deserves its place in the Alliance." Frank shook the old master's hand. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did." Daria hesitated at the door. "Be careful, Frank. The Poloros won't just accept defeat. If you win, there will be consequences." "I know," Frank nodded. "But some fights are worth the consequences." The Mind Arena was transformed for the final round. The floating platforms were elevated higher, surrounded by holographic displays showing neural activity in real time. 5,000 spectators filled the stands, with millions more watching via transmission across the Alliance. The Eye Contact Eternal Challenge was deceptively simple. 2 contestants, standing on platforms, maintaining eye contact without movement. Whoever displayed signs of psychological distress first, increased heart rate, perspiration, muscle tremors, would lose. What made it lethal was the duration. Most Eternal matches lasted less than a minute before one contestant's mind simply couldn't withstand the pressure. Frank entered to a mixture of cheers and murmurs. Across the arena, Graf Alar appeared on his platform, smaller than Pellegrini but somehow more intense, his red eyes gleaming under the arena lights, neural augmentation circuits visible at his temples. "The human arrives for his humiliation," Gra's voice carried across the space between them. "Your victories have been entertaining, but ultimately meaningless. Today, the natural order will be restored." Frank took his position, centering himself, feeling the reassuring presence of the blind code detector at the base of his skull. "Final round commences in 3, 2, 1, begin." Their eyes locked, and immediately Frank understood why Graf Alar was considered the ultimate master of mindsight. The pressure was overwhelming, not aggressive, not empty, but omnipresent, like being submerged in an ocean of another's will. 10 seconds passed. Frank maintained his focus, remembering his training. "I am human. I have value. My eyes are my strength." 20 seconds. The blind code detector vibrated gently, the first artificial manipulation attempt. Frank's mind was suddenly flooded with images of his mother's death, the fire that had taken her, his own helplessness. But he recognized the intrusion and mentally labeled it, "Not mine." 30 seconds. Graf Alar's confidence began to waver, almost imperceptibly. A subtle change in his breathing pattern, a slight tension around his eyes. The Poloro champion had never needed to maintain pressure this long against any opponent. 40 seconds. The blind code activated again, more aggressively this time. Frank felt his heart rate spike involuntarily, sweat beading on his forehead. The neural monitors detected the change, displaying it on the holographic screens surrounding them. The crowd murmured, "Was the human finally breaking?" But Frank had been prepared for this moment. He closed his eyes briefly, technically a violation of the rules, but one that would cost him points rather than the match, and centered himself again. When he reopened them, something had changed. His gaze was no longer defensive but piercing, carrying all the determination, all the struggles, all the hope of his journey. "I see you," he said quietly. His words meant only for Graf Alar. "I see beyond your techniques, beyond your manipulation. I see your fear." Graf Alar's composure cracked, a visible tremor in his hands, a sudden intake of breath. The neural monitors registered a spike in his stress patterns. 45 seconds. The arena had fallen completely silent, 5,000 spectators holding their breath collectively. This was unprecedented. A Poloro champion on the verge of defeat by a human. In desperation, the blind code activated a third time, a full spectrum assault on Frank's neural pathways. Pain lanced through his head, his vision blurring, but he maintained his gaze, focusing on a single thought. "I am human. This is my strength. At 57 seconds, Graf Falar broke. His eyes widened, then blinked rapidly. A visible shudder ran through his small frame. The neural monitors flashed confirmation. Psychological distress patterns detected. Frank Wilson had won the Mind Battle Championship. For a moment, the arena remained silent, the collective shock of 5,000 witnesses processing what they had just seen. Then, like a wave building force, the cheers began, swelling to a deafening roar. Frank stood on his platform, exhausted but triumphant, as the announcement echoed. The winner of the 151st Mind Battle Tournament, Franklin Wilson of Earth. But the celebration was short-lived. As Frank stepped off his platform, movement caught his eye. Sark Klo, Graf Falar's security chief, rushing forward with a neural disruptor aimed directly at Frank's head. "The human cheated!" Sark shouted, his finger tightening on the trigger. Frank reacted instinctively, diving to the side as the disruptor fired. The neural blast missed him by inches, striking the platform behind him, using the momentum of his dive. Frank rolled to his feet and delivered a powerful strike to Sark's midsection, sending the Peloro security chief staggering backward. The arena erupted in chaos. Security drones descended, surrounding Frank and Sark. In the control booth above, Peloro officials were frantically communicating, their gestures agitated. Then, the main holographic display above the arena flickered and changed. Daria Thorne's face appeared, her expression determined. "Citizens of the Alliance," her voice boomed through the arena. "What you have just witnessed is not merely a historic victory, but the exposure of a systemic fraud." The display shifted to show technical schematics, the blind code system, operation logs, financial transactions between Peloro Consortium members and Arcturian technology providers. For decades, the Mind Battle Tournament has been manipulated through illegal neural induction technology. The Peloro dominance was not achieved through superior skill alone, but through systematic cheating. The evidence was damning. Recorded instances of blind code activation during critical matches. Financial payments to Arcturian officials for maintaining the system. A list of previous contestants who had suffered permanent neural damage after particularly aggressive blind code applications. In the control booth, Peloro officials were frantically trying to shut down the transmission, but Daria had locked them out of their own systems. Franklin Wilson's victory today was not just a triumph of human potential, but a victory against corruption. His HDC blood made him naturally resistant to neural manipulation, which is why they invited him to compete in the first place. They wanted to study his resistance, not celebrate his ability. The arena had fallen silent again, thousands of spectators absorbing this revelation. Among them, many Arcturians and Savars were turning to look at the Peloro sections with growing anger. Sark Klo, seeing his advantage slipping away, made another desperate lunge for his neural disruptor. Frank intercepted him with a powerful strike that sent the Peloro security chief crashing into a monitoring station. "Security containment protocols initiated," a mechanical voice announced, as force fields descended around the arena floor, separating the contestants from the increasingly agitated crowd. In the midst of the chaos, Graf Falar approached Frank. The Peloro champion's demeanor had changed, the arrogance replaced by something like resignation. "You would have won anyway," he said quietly. "Blind code or no blind code. Your eyes. They contain something we Peloros have forgotten." "What's that?" Frank asked, wary of a trick. "The truth of who you are," Gra replied. "We Peloros have hidden behind technology for so long. We've forgotten the power of genuine connection." He extended a small gray hand. "I would learn from you, if you would teach." Before Frank could respond, Alliance security forces swarmed the arena, led by Gareth Thorne, the Arcturian representative to the Mind Battle Committee. "Containment protocols in effect," Thorne announced. "All Peloro officials are temporarily suspended pending investigation. The tournament results are under review." Frank was escorted from the arena under heavy security. His status suddenly ambiguous, neither champion nor criminal, but something in between. As he left, he caught sight of Daria being taken into custody by Arcturian security forces, her expression defiant even as they confiscated her equipment. The exposure of the blind code system sent shockwaves through the Alliance. Emergency sessions were convened, investigations launched, assets frozen. The Peloro Consortium's leadership faced severe sanctions, and several high-ranking Arcturian officials were removed from their positions. Frank spent the following days in a secure medical facility, recovering from the neural strain of the final match. The blind code detector had protected him from the worst effects, but he hadn't escaped unscathed. His left eye showed signs of neural damage, temporary, the doctors assured him, but requiring extensive treatment. On the third day, Master Tanaka was permitted to visit. "You've started quite the revolution," the old man said, settling into a chair beside Frank's bed. "Not intentionally," Frank replied. "I just wanted to compete fairly. Sometimes the greatest changes come from the simplest desires." Tanaka's expression grew serious. "The committee has been deliberating your case. Officially, you violated competition rules by using the blind code detector." Frank nodded. "I figured as much." "But," Tanaka continued, "given the circumstances and the overwhelming evidence of systematic manipulation by the Peloros, they have decided to uphold your victory. You are, officially, the Mind Battle Champion." Frank absorbed this news silently. After everything that had happened, the title seemed almost secondary. "What about Daria?" he asked. "Released this morning. Her exposé on the blind code system is being broadcast across the Alliance. She's become something of a hero to the reform movement." "And the Peloros?" Tanaka's expression darkened. "The consortium leadership faces criminal charges, but not all Peloros supported their actions. Many were victims of the system themselves." "Like Grafalar?" "Exactly. He's been speaking publicly about the need for reform, for a return to the true principles of mindsight, rather than technological shortcuts." Frank stared at the ceiling, processing everything. "So what happens now?" "Now," Tanaka smiled slightly, "you have decisions to make. The 5 million energy credit prize is yours. You could return to Earth a wealthy man. Or you could stay on Arcturus 7. Help build something new. The committee is establishing a Mindsight Academy, open to all species, including humans. They've asked me to lead it, and I've suggested you as my primary instructor." Frank turned to look at the old master, surprised. "Me? I barely understand mindsight myself." "You understand the most important aspect. That true strength comes from within, not from technology or biological advantage. That's the lesson the Alliance needs most right now." 6 months later, Nexus Central was transformed for the inaugural Mind Unity Festival. The same arena that had hosted the controversial Mind Battle now served as the center for a celebration of interspecies cooperation and authentic mindsight techniques. Frank stood on the central platform, the left side of his face still bearing the faint marks of neural damage. Beside him stood representatives from all Alliance species, Savars, Arcturians, Peloros, and a small but growing contingent of humans who had been inspired by his victory to journey to Arcturus 7. Before him, hundreds of students, young Savars with their shifting skin patterns, stoic Peloros learning to express rather than suppress emotion, analytical Arcturians, and humans eager to discover their own potential. "Mindsight is not about domination," Frank addressed them, his voice carried across the arena. "It's not about making others fear you. It's about connection, the most profound connection possible between two conscious beings." In the audience, Daria Thorne recorded the proceedings for her new independent media platform. Her exposé had earned her both acclaim and exile from traditional Arcturian communications networks. But she had found a new purpose in documenting the reformation of Alliance society. "Today, we begin a new chapter," Frank continued. One where no species claims superiority, where technology enhances our natural abilities rather than replacing them, where eye contact becomes a bridge rather than a weapon. Among the students, Graf Falar nodded approvingly. The former champion had become one of Frank's most dedicated pupils, working to rediscover the authentic Peloro traditions that had been overshadowed by technological shortcuts. As the ceremony concluded, Frank stepped down from the platform to join the celebrating crowd. A small child, an Arcturian with bright, curious eyes, approached him hesitantly. "Is it true that humans have special eyes?" the child asked. Frank knelt to meet the child at eye level. "We all have special eyes," he replied. "The secret is learning to truly see with them." He looked up, catching Daria's gaze across the crowd. She smiled and gave him a subtle nod, acknowledgement of how far they had come, and how much further they had yet to go. In a quiet moment during the festivities, Master Tanaka found Frank watching the sunset from an observation deck. "Thinking about Earth?" the old man asked. "Sometimes," Frank admitted. "But I've found something here I never had there. Purpose, connection." Tanaka nodded thoughtfully. "You changed the Alliance. You know, not just by winning the mind battle, but by showing everyone that strength comes in many forms." "They thought nothing could intimidate them," Frank said with a small smile, "until a human made eye contact. And now?" Frank looked out at the bustling city of Nexus Central, where humans walked freely among Savars, Arcturians, and Peloros, not as outsiders but as equals. "Now we learn to see each other clearly," he said. "All of us." As darkness fell over Arcturus 7, the city lights created patterns reminiscent of neural pathways, connections binding together diverse elements into a single, complex whole. A fitting metaphor, Frank thought, for what they were building, a true alliance, based not on domination, but on mutual respect and understanding. The future would bring its own challenges. There were whispers of a new faction, Mind Shadow, working in secret to develop more sophisticated neural manipulation technologies. But that was tomorrow's battle. For tonight, Franklin Wilson, once a failed sumo wrestler from Earth, now the human who had changed an interstellar alliance with nothing but the power of his gaze, was content to watch the stars and know that his eyes had opened a path for others to follow.